Welcome to the Crypto Podcast. You can find all our episodes on cryptopodcast.org. You'll find all my six podcasts. You can scan the QR code or go to roycollin.com. If you're looking for virtual assistance, go to va.world. My guest served as a federal prosecutor for the U.S. Department of Justice for nearly a decade, specializing in money laundering and cryptocurrency. She worked in three U.S. attorney offices, Atlanta, Birmingham, and St. Louis, I think, how you pronounce it. After that, she moved to Maine Justice uh, to serve in the Criminal Division Money Laundering and Asset Recovery Session. As part of the DOJ Leadership Program, she served as a detailee and senior policy advisor at the Financial Crimes Enforcement Network, FinCEN, F-I-N-C-E-N. In 2020, she left the government to serve as the Chief of Legal Affairs at the Chain Analysis, a blockchain analysis company. In 21, she returned to the government service to serve as the House Select Committee to investigate the January 6th attack on the US Capitol. She went on to found and run a global non-profit organization, the Association for Women in Cryptocurrency. The organization aims to build a global network of women and male allies in the cryptocurrency, blockchain, and Web3 industries who will advocate for the equal inclusion of women in the future of digital finance. She also serves as a principal with Insight Consulting. In that role, she provides expert and litigation advisory services to law firms and advisories a wide range of cryptocurrency related businesses. She remains a digital nomad, even though she's from Florida, originally in the US of A. And she carry on suitcase and run places. But she's also just finished a book, The Catalyst, her first book, which we'll be discussing. Please welcome Amanda Wick.
Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, no problem. And usually I wouldn't read that much, but I thought, ooh, that's a lot to be covering in. Then you're still very
I,
young. It's like, how did you fit that in? Hey, the government has a way of reverse aging or something like that because you've got a lot of experience there.
yeah, well, I tell people it's actually sunscreen. I think Boz Lerman did a song years ago where it was like, wear sunscreen. And I took that to heart. And I am like, I absolutely obsessive about SPF 70 whenever I leave the house as a Floridian. And so whenever people ask, I'm like, well, it's sunscreen, good living.
Very good. You're in the right part at the moment, then you're in the right part of the country. I suppose let's kind of talk about your crypto journey. I mean, like I mentioned, kind of different things, but for you yourself, when did you find out about it? How did it all come about for you?
Yeah, actually, it was an interesting thing because I was a money laundering prosecutor, and one of my agents came in and said, "Do you know what a Bitcoin is?" And this would have been about 2012, so Bitcoin was relatively new, probably about 2 years old, I think. But I hadn't heard of it, and so I said, "I don't think that's a real thing." And he said, "No, it's a real thing, and I'm pretty sure we got a guy laundering a lot of it, so we're going to need to learn what it is." And back then, there was no training, there was no information about it, so we went to YouTube University and Google to learn about what it was. And we had a very entrepreneurial fellow who was very involved on the original darknet, and he saw the darknet was where they were selling kind of like drugs and illegal items online, and so he saw a market opportunity for people who needed cash for crypto and crypto for cash. And so I ended up having a very, very early crypto money laundering case. And then I became fascinated with the technology because just like any other technology, criminals might be first adopters, but then when you look at its underlying capabilities and how it can be used for good, there were some really incredible things about it. And so I got really passionate about the tech and the industry. And then when I got into the industry, I was like, oh, this is really cool. And it's so much more than just like the coins themselves. And so now I'm, I do a lot of consulting and advisory work and advocating for what we would call like blockchain for good. So.
And when there's a criminal case with Bitcoin involved or other cryptocurrencies, does the government go, yep, well, wait, that's going into our coffers, or do they try to find where it should go?
Well, you know what's so funny is in the past, like for the last, well, since cryptocurrency started being investigated, and I can only speak for the federal government, not for state, but in the United States, for the federal government, we treated it like any other asset. And if we seized it and it belonged to a victim, we would return it to the victim. if it was stolen funds. If it was drug money or something where there was no victim, it got treated like any other property where the government seizes it. They go through a process called forfeiture, which converts the legal ownership of the property into the government. And then once the government owned it, they could liquidate it. So for years, there was this kind of not really great process where they would get a bunch of crypto and then the Marshal Service would actually auction it off in large blocks. And there's actually a couple crypto companies today that are pretty successful because they bought those like big initial chunks from like the Silk Road seizures, right? And now the Trump administration had said, well, we're going to create a stockpile. But all they really did was just basically say, we're going to stop converting and selling that crypto. And instead of converting it to fiat, we're just going to let it sit and we're just going to hold it. So essentially, a lot of our cases that would have just had crypto, converted by an exchange or something or sold at auction is now just sitting in the possession of the government as a stockpile asset, but it didn't really change that much. They didn't buy new. They just basically stopped selling what was in the hopper to get sold. So, and there's good arguments for that. There's arguments against it. It can be a volatile market. And we had defendants who used to clamor at us, sell, sell, sell. It's really, really high. We'd sell it. And then a month later it would go higher and they'd be like, why did you sell it? And we're like, because you literally screamed at us, sell it for months. And then the price went up and you're unhappy. But if the price had gone down, you'd have been screaming at us for not selling it. Like it was just lose lose. So it's one of those things that with a volatile asset, basically whatever decision you make, everyone's vision will be hindsight. Everyone's hindsight will be 2020, and you will never make the right decision. That's just basically the rules.
Like a lot of the guests that have come on, and a lot of people, nearly everyone has some sort of fraud or scam. And it's usually kind of like it's done and dusted. And what happens is you hear wallet goes to somebody and then it goes to a load of different wallets. The reality is like it's hurting blockchain that's happening. How easy is it to catch, or is it really difficult? Because the reality is you have to kind of know your customer, and most of the times you have to cash it in somewhere.
Yeah, so that's actually changed over the years, right? And it is still, I would say, very traceable. I think most investigators around the world who are tracing, and we could talk about the different question, which is how hard is it for law enforcement with different budgets to actually have that capability? Because that's a different issue. But for the ones who can afford the proper tools, who have the proper training, it's still relatively easy, especially with open blockchains, to trace crypto. The problem that's happened over the years is, I hate to say it, but criminals are some of the smartest people in the world. I used to joke that if we could turn criminal energy towards improving the world would be a magical place because some of the smartest individuals I've ever met on the planet sadly turned to a life of criminality, right? And
And that's the
they
government
were
you're
getting,
talking about, is it?
well, yeah, depending on which side, right? And interestingly, crypto technologically kind of exploits the government's biggest weaknesses when it comes to investigations, right? In fact, a federal agent I used to work with said, crypto exploits the two things that law enforcement are the worst at: technology and financial investigations. And there was some truth to that. And unfortunately, law enforcement rarely can't move as fast as crypto moves. And a lot of times the funds move too quickly, where it used to be that we could get it at an exchange and exchanges would hold up. But now there's too many exchanges that don't have KYC AML processes. There's too many unregulated exchanges. There's too many that don't have sufficient compliance. The funds can move on and off those off ramps too fast. And then the other thing that a lot of us are talking about now is the entire system was kind of premised on those on and off ramps and KYC being at those exchanges. But the more and more that people are able to actually use crypto for payments, right? Like when Tesla allowed people to buy cars with Bitcoin, or when Overstock allowed people to use crypto, the more you can direct purchase things with crypto, then you don't even need the on off ramps and the payments made. And if you're some innocent person who sold their house, say, to somebody for crypto, you transfer title and then you later learn that it's all drug money or it's all terrorist financing. you would have no idea of knowing that, and you'd be some innocent owner. The government wouldn't come after you and say, well, we've got to get that money back because you had no idea you sold a perfectly legitimate, right? So there's a lot of problems with the system where the technology is just moving so fast and the regulations and the governments have just been completely unable to keep up.
And, like one of the things, every country is different regarding the tax, the capital gains. And a lot of people think, oh, I'll just use a few wallets, I'll do this, I'll do that. I'm convinced they're letting people build up as much as they want, and they go plus interest plus penalties. You just owe us everything. Give us your car, give us your house, give us your sweat equity for the rest of your life. And that's where I'm worried. And I think most people think they can get away with it, that it's untraceable, but I think they can see everything.
Well, they can see everything. And I will tell you, agencies like the IRS in the United States and I think the FIAD in the Netherlands, like there are agencies that are very tech savvy that are looking at this. There's regulations, I think, that are proliferating all over Europe and the UK in addition to the United States. So, when to your point, when the government wants its pound of flesh, like it will find it. And I think now, if you look at companies like TaxBit, I have a girlfriend, Adela Holloway. She runs, I think, DNA Legacy blockchain. Like you see all these crypto accountancies, and they're not just crypto accountants; they're accountants, but they also have this additional specialization. I know, I think Carolina Martinez is one of the women in our association, but a lot of women who were in accounting, they saw what was happening in crypto, and they were kind of like the canaries in the coal mine to say, you need to understand this is going to impact your taxes. You really want to be compliant with this. It's not the easiest thing to do. You need special software. You need to understand how it works because in a country like the United States, we have something called the statute of limitations, which is like the time period that the government come back if you committed a crime or if say you didn't pay your taxes. There's like a period of time where 4 or 5 years, depending on the crime, sometimes 10, where they can come back and say, hey, you did this 3 years ago, but we're coming after you for it now. And this is one of the issues that people in the United States are struggling with because the Trump administration says, oh, we're going to pause this law, or we're going to pause enforcement. Theoretically, assuming no constitutional changes, administrations only last 4 years. So if you are committing a crime during this administration and a new administration comes in and the statute of limitations is 5 years, you may find yourself in a world of hurt if you think it's safe to do something now that years down the road, somebody's like, as it turns out, we can come back and get that penalty, that fine, and prosecute you. So, lawyers right now, especially in the United States, are telling people, please follow the law no matter what anybody says. You do not want to get penalized, prosecuted, or have some giant tax fine follow you because you didn't file this properly.
And just because a lot of the wallets that people use, the trends, the Nano Ledger and different things. I mean, most people aren't taking them apart and seeing, but it's quite possible that there could be trackers in them as well that we don't know about that's actually letting them know.
Yeah, I mean, I would be surprised with Ledger because I think it's a France-based company, and they've been very big on self-autonomy. And I would be shocked if there were trackers in ledgers, to be honest. Um, Having said that, there was, I think, like a FBI undercover operation, I want to say like a year ago, maybe, where I forget what they were doing. They were operating some kind of a wallet and gathering information, right? And I tell people, like, look, if you're out there just doing you and trying your best, right? I mean, the United States tax code is notoriously complex. And I tell people, and I don't give legal advice, but as a former prosecutor who worked tax evasion cases, I will tell my friends and family the law, the criminal law, wasn't meant to get people who tried their best and got it wrong. It's meant to get people who know the law and are willfully violating it and are evading taxes, right? And those people know who they are. They spend sometimes millions of dollars, or they just like don't file at all, even though they know they're supposed to file taxes. So like there's a lot that goes into it. But if you're just a person who's confused and you have no idea what to do and you do your best, generally, right? Oftentimes that's what matters. I think the thing is that now a lot of people, and one of the scary things, especially in crypto, and we've seen this over the years, is every time there's a crypto like bull run, or a president gets excited about crypto, or there's Bitcoin prices go up, all of a sudden there's this influx of professionals, lawyers, accountants, suddenly everyone's into crypto and they're a crypto blockchain expert, and they may have been in for like 5 minutes, right? You've been doing this podcast for how long? And I'm sure you've seen some people who kind of pop up overnight and are
Every time
suddenly
it goes
crypto
up there
experts.
on your social media, and when it's dropping, it's like, oh, they're doing something else now.
Exactly, right? All of a sudden, it's AI is the popular thing the minute that crypto prices go down, which means that it's really hard to find trusted professionals who have been in this. So I tell people look for years, look for several years. Crypto's been around, I think, since 2009 or 2010. Look for people who have been in it for as long as possible, who have lived through the ups, who have lived through the downs, who have seen the changes, the guidances, the memos, the statutes, right? Like you want somebody who actually knows what they're talking about. You don't want somebody who started a pop-up tent, the minute that it got cool and is suddenly a crypto blockchain expert, whether it's a lawyer, an accountant, God help you, somebody giving you investment advice, right? Like just there's an expression in crypto, I'm sure you talk about this all the time, DYOR, right? Do your own research. But it's hard because there's a lot of crap out there. So I'm always really grateful for people like you who give people a platform to come on and spend a bunch of time talking about it beyond the sound bites, beyond the social media marketing to kind of really hash these things out and talk about the good, the bad, the ugly, and the nuance because it's nuanced, it's gray, it's nothing is black and white.
And, with the government, then, what wallet do they actually use?
Oh gosh, I mean, governments around the world have so many different things, right? I am an advisor to an amazing company called Asset Reality, and they have an entire training program largely for people who work in governments or who do kind of custody transfer because the process of transferring like of transferring funds from a wallet is so critical and so important. I remember when we first started working cases, I want to say back in like 2013, 14, maybe even 2015, some of the agents didn't really know how the wallets worked. So they would grab like a ledger, throw it in a drawer, put it in there and think we got the funds and have no idea actually somebody has a recovery seed phrase, recovers the wallet somewhere else, moves the money, and the money's gone. And then 2 years later, they plug that USB drive in, all the money's gone. They're like, but I put it in my drawer. And we're like, that's not how wallets work, right? So now there's been a lot more education. And governments are doing education. Companies like Asset Reality are doing education. So there's a lot happening to make what we call building capacity in law enforcement so that if a victim's funds are stolen, we have the best chance of getting it back. Or if it's criminal proceeds, we have the best chance of taking it away from criminals so they don't profit off of their crimes.
Just curious about meme coins. Even just before he took office, he creates one. His wife creates one, and there's a load of even the Argentinian guy done one. A rug pull. There was a scam going on there, but it's like I think. Personally, I don't think that should be allowed because you've got so much influence. You're out there. Everybody's kind of living on your word. They either hate you or they love you, and you come along and you create something, and it's like people just invest in it, thinking that this is going a certain way. And unfortunately, there's a lot of influencers doing the same thing. But that's like like what you had said earlier. Do your own research. It's kind of just because it's someone's name doesn't mean that it's going to go up.
Well, when I was doing research for the book, I looked a lot into financial literacy because I'm really blessed that my parents are financial planners. And I just thought everybody growing up were little nerd kids that talked about interest rates, and compound interest over time at the dinner table. And it turns out, nope, that was a weird family that we had. But it turns out that, about, I think, two-thirds, I think two-thirds of the world is financially illiterate. And that's a really terrifying thing because we haven't been teaching financial literacy, especially in democracies. That's kind of a travesty when you think about it, because we actually have the ability to have a lot of control over our finances, ostensibly, right? And if you don't know the risk of investments, if you don't know how risky something is, then you can make really bad life choices, right? Now, having said that, when people tell me about meme coins and they're like, well, we should ban meme coins and make them illegal, I kind of say, are you going to do that for casinos? Are you going to do that for betting houses? Because we all know how terrible an idea a casino is. And yet, millions of people travel around the world to walk into a building where the odds are literally against them and they'll throw money away. And there are a lot of people who would say they enjoy meme coins. They like, supporting fart coin or dog with hat or whatever the, new thing is of the day. And there's a cultural aspect to it that I think people don't realize. But in my mind, I don't see it any different than the gambling industry, right? Except for the fact that usually there's like especially in Europe, one of the things I love is there's usually tons of warnings about if you were to go to a casino, if you have a gambling problem, call this number, right? Or there's usually like a disclaimer. I remember driving around Ireland and listening to the radio, and even their lottery tickets, they have like a little announcement on the radio that's like, you have a 0% chance of winning. It's like a very nice, loving, wonderful, just know you're making a terrible life choice, like, but we don't do that for crypto. And it's that consumer education, consumer protection piece that's missing that I think a lot of us in crypto wish the industry was better at or that there was more regulation. I think other countries are doing this better. I don't think you're going to see consumer protection increase in America. But to your point, it would be really great if you want to go into meme coins, great, but then understand the risk. Understand that, there are people with algorithms and trading programs that are analyzing all of this, and you are at a disadvantage if you're just a person trading in meme coins when there are professionals who are trading against you, right? But that's the stock market too. So, there's something to be said about the way that our economy is kind of. There's an expression they use for it called dumb money. Have you ever heard that? Did you see the movie with Seth Rogen? It was about like the GameStop, the stock shorts with the not Hello Kitty, Raging Kitty, something Kitty. But it was based on a true story, like a series of true events, and a guy wrote a book called Dumb Money. But that's like a term they use to describe retail investors. And that's pretty terrifying when you think about it, right? Because that dumb money is oftentimes somebody's pension, somebody's life savings, some kid's college fund. And we can't afford for people to be dumb with their money like that, especially given the wealth inequality gap that's growing globally. So, meme coins to me are kind of like a symptom of a greater disease, one that I talk about a lot in the book, which is the need for greater financial literacy and for people to kind of take back and kind of get themselves out of the social misinformation bubble and realize that too much of the world right now is really helping the haves and is really hurting the have-nots.
I suppose with the book, like what was your reasoning behind it? And then you might tell us what you're covering in it.
Yeah, so when I was a prosecutor, especially being a money laundering, have you ever served on a jury? I don't know if
I,
Poland or
I've
Ireland
I've
has
had a criminal
juries.
case against me. I've had over 100 court cases, so I know what it's like to be in court. And I've had prosecutors fall asleep across me, and I just wanted to get up and punch them. So I know what it's like, and I was cleared because obviously they were coming after me to take my money. But I'm familiar with the judicial system.
Okay, well, so you'll know exactly what I'm talking about. But it, you know, too often in court things are too complicated, right? And in the United States justice system, if you're taking away somebody's liberty and you have to convince 12 people to find somebody guilty beyond a reasonable doubt, which is our high burden, you really almost effectively have to convince them beyond all doubt. Because, like, if you're a human and you feel any doubt that somebody's guilty, you don't want to send them possibly to prison, right? So, like, you want to be sure this person did it, right? And the best way to do that is to explain things very simply, very straightforwardly, and as easily and as non-complex as possible. So we always used to joke that the best skill that a prosecutor could have is being able to take very complex topics and explain them in a very simple, relatable way. Like we have an expression, I don't know if you have it, KISS, keep it simple, stupid,
Yeah.
right? It's like a policy to live by. And I noticed when I went from the government to Chainalysis, the blockchain analytics company you mentioned, we did a lot of training for law enforcement around the world, banks around the world, regulators around the world. And the simpler that we could make the explanation and the more relatable that we could make it, the more people felt empowered because then they actually understood it. And they didn't need to understand the technical difficulty or, the intricacies of like how to hash transact. They just needed to understand the concepts to be able to kind of have enough of a view to say, I understand this enough to make life choices, right? And so when I wrote the book, I had spent nearly a decade in the government. I had worked in a blockchain analytics company. I had spent a year investigating the disease that is eating America alive that led to the attack on January 6th. I had just watched so much misinformation and disinformation and political brokenness. And when I formed the association, I was traveling around the world attending events, and I got to speak to all these regulators and policymakers and business people from around the world. And, it's a small number of Americans who get the privilege of traveling outside of the country. Tons of Americans don't even have a passport, and it's cost prohibitive. So I got this incredible opportunity to visit tons of countries and speak to tons of people. And there was this thing that I was seeing that was basically like something was happening in the world that we weren't talking about. Like what was happening in America was much worse than anyone was talking about. And what was happening outside of America was actually pretty great, and nobody was talking about it objectively. And so I decided to write this book about, hey, if you want to know what's happening in the world in a very straightforward, easy to understand way, there's a lot of things that you should be aware of, because some books will focus on one thing, American political and economic dysfunction, or another book will focus on like the rise of nationalism, or the social engineering and social manipulation. And my thing is nobody has time to read all of those books, right? But maybe if you had one book that talked about all of them and explained how all of them interact, and it was a breadth book and not necessarily a go into depth on each and every topic book, if you had a 360 view of what was happening in the world, maybe a lot of us would feel less afraid if we felt like we better understood what was going on. And maybe we could solve more problems if all of us understood all the different factors that were going into it. And the book talks about politics, but it's really not meant to be political. I criticize parties on both sides. I criticize companies. I talk about the facts of what basically the planet is doing and where we're at. And if you're a human that kind of wants to know, or a citizen of the world or a citizen of some country, I'd like to think that it explains what's happening, especially in terms of the financial world order, in a way that empowers people to make better life choices, especially regulators and policymakers who I feel like sometimes sit in their little silo and don't look outside and don't think about all the things that might be impacting their jobs that they just don't get a chance to see.
And you mentioned the financial world order. We've heard of the new world order, and it looks like, they want digital currency, get rid of cash and everything. And, the reality is most people are using their debit and credit cards, without even realizing it. They think they have control. And I saw something, CoffeeZilla did something recently about some bank people lost all their money, and it was like kind of tough. Oh, the money was moved from here to there and disappeared. And it's like, and then in Cyprus, they kind of, the bailout, they took the money from the people there. In Greece, you were allowed to use €50. You're not really protected no matter what. And digital currency, in a way, is kind of like, we don't like you. Let's press the delete button, or let's kind of take it. Because I personally have had my accounts emptied fraudulently by government or the city and just taken, and you don't get it back no matter what you do. Like you try, so it's scary when they have easier access to it, as opposed to if it's in your wallet or if you have it in gold and different things. They like to touch on that.
Well, and it's funny because I was just having a conversation with a friend who's Australian, but he's living in London, and he said the same thing, right? And you hear this a lot of times. I talk in the book about something called a CBDC, which is a central bank digital currency, which is usually what people are talking about, what you were just talking about right now. And it's the idea that a government could issue its funds in a digital form, right? And China has one, and I can't remember it. There's so many countries that are actively in the practice of building them, because it makes sense, right? Like cash it's kind of filthy, it's inconvenient, it's expensive, it's not portable, right? Like there's a lot of, impracticalities of it. We learned during a pandemic it can actually spread disease. But to your point, on the other side, and I have an entire chapter on the decline in institutional trust, which is a global problem. If you no longer trust your government and you don't trust institutions, the idea of moving to a digital form of payment when your government could possibly hit delete or take your funds or take all your money, right, in a way that they can't with cash, this really does keep people up at nights, right? Especially when you look at like a country like China, where you have a totalitarian slash authoritarian regime that absolutely could and would do this and probably has done this. people then in democracies that kind of look at the erosion of democratic norms and the ability of a government to just do what it wants without ramifications. And they're terrified of the idea that, well, if I made all my money digital and the government has its finger on the delete button, what if I criticize it? What if I say something bad? What if I'm a dissident? What if I'm a protester? What if they make a mistake? I don't do any of those things and they just get my name wrong and leave the Y out of Roy, right? Or add a Y and take Rose money, right? There's all kinds of things that could theoretically happen. And the problem is that people just don't, a lot of people right now don't trust their governments enough to have that much power over their funds. And that's a very realistic concern. I think the problem is, as with all things in crypto, is that you need balance, right? Like I wanted to include stoicism in the book and my publisher was like, it's already too long. You can't possibly include stoicism. So I basically talk about it, right? When I talk about the book, but I got into stoicism about 4 or 5 years ago now, and I'm a big believer in it as a philosophy for like just as a way of life. And one of the virtues is temperance, like balance in things. And the thing is when you think about a CBDC, there is 100% risk, but there's also a huge reward to it. Like Europe, I believe, is working on euro dollar basically, and there are people who may not have access to payment systems, who will be able to have access to payment systems, who won't pay 2, 3, 6, 7% in the intermediary fees that they're currently paying to credit cards and banks and everyone charging us to move our money. So there is an argument that good governments, trustworthy governments, might do this the right way and could build in safety provisions that would prevent people from being able to do that. But that's a lot of trust in a world where trust is declining. And unfortunately, there's no easy answer. It's a really complicated, I believe the Brits would call it a sticky wicket. And if we just do sound bites and political fear mongering, which has happened a lot in the United States when we talk about CBDCs, people just don't want it. They just say no. They'd rather pay. And that's fine. If you'd rather pay 6%, 5%, whatever your transaction processing fee is, just know that there's a cost, right, to not having government provided services. And some people would say, I'm willing to pay that cost because I don't want government to have unfettered access to my funds. It's just a discussion that countries need to have. And some countries are researching it and doing it really thoroughly and really what's the word, like not systemically but intentionally and deliberately, and some countries aren't.
Estonia is kind of ahead of the curve with all the stuff. I've got my e-residency company there, and they were trying to create their own coin, and the EU blocked them. They wouldn't allow it. And like a lot of people think the EU is a great thing. There was one of the MEPs from Ireland went in there and he recorded when he shouldn't how they were actually voting for things. And you're going into a dark room, well, a room with no windows, and somebody's accompanying you. You're not allowed to record it. You're not allowed verbatim. You can make a few little notes, and that's how they're passing the bills. And even now with the immigration, like they're giving fines of 20,000 per immigrant if you don't take them in. Poland, Czech, and Hungary are stopping that, and they're the safest countries. So even though you kind of they create something, the euro, and people think, oh, this is great because when Ireland came into the euro, it's great. You're going to a different country and you're not losing a fortune on exchange rates. And like I look at people and they're going to the airport banks, and I just want to go up and shake them and say, please don't do this because they're taking 25 to 30% off you, and they don't even realize. It's just like, but it's even with that, it's like, and you mentioned China, like if you look at anywhere else in the world, like there's a credit system because if you want to get a house or whatever, it's like, hey, yeah, you good boy, no, then you don't get a loan, and it's like, so there is a credit system everywhere, so it's very hard. And like the other thing is the protection with the banks, because some countries it's like 50,000 and others it's 100. I don't think it's more than 100,000. So if you're a millionaire, like what do you do? Go into 10 different banks, and it's like that's not really convenient either. So there's no real kind of safe system because everyone's trying to protect themselves and maybe earn a certain bit of interest. But there's always the market's being manipulated by people and they're losing. Pensions, as you say, go down, go down, go down. It's like the everyday person is losing constantly, and the big boys are just making more money. And unfortunately, that's the way the whole financial system is.
It's so funny you said that because that is in some ways where I got to at the end of the book. And it's hard not to get depressed. Like when you really like dig into and look at what's happening in the world, it's hard not to become nihilistic and depressed and just start drinking like all the time, right? Um, but there is something to be said, and I guess one of my hopes for the book was to at least start the discussion because one of the things that was kind of in what you said, or at least one of the things that I took away from it, so correct me if it wasn't kind of your intention, but the system has always, especially capitalism, has always been rigged to benefit the haves and take from the have-nots. And in the past, there were systems, like Singapore or other countries where, yes, there were a lot of haves, but they acknowledged like you have to keep the have-nots happy enough because you have to live together, right? And some countries were better about recognizing if you have a middle class, if you give people a comfortable life, then they will generally be okay with their lot in life and they won't necessarily resent the fact that it's very difficult to become a have, right? And I'm not saying that's what Singapore does specifically. I do think that's what's happened in the United States. You see some countries where the wealth inequality gap has gotten so massive. There's so few haves, and everybody's really a have not. So, what do you have to do? You have to basically manipulate the have nots into either thinking that they have more than they do, or that it's easier, that if they just vote with these people, they can get into that category. You just have to basically calm them over and over and over into choosing because we can vote, into voting against their self interest, or make it seem like voting is the election is rigged. It's pointless to vote. You don't need to vote. You don't need to have a say. Just stay home and everything will be fine. And the only people who benefit from that in either political party are the haves. Like that's the truly sad thing in democracies around the world right now is that whether you look at the left or you look at the right, the people who are actually benefiting are the haves, and the people that are losing are the have nots. And the thing that those people should have in common is the have nots should care about the system being rigged against them. But the haves are really, really good at getting them to kind of ignore that and fight amongst themselves about otherism and things like DEI and all the crap that they can make up to make the have nots fight against themselves instead of, to your point, looking at the system has been rigged against you for over 100 years. At some point, it's fool you once, shame on me, fool you 1,000 times, shame on you. And my thing was, okay, but we don't make it so easy for those people to get educated and learn what's going on. And that's why I wrote the book. Not everyone can read. Not everyone can read a long book. Not everyone has the patience to sit. And if you're a listener, I promise an audiobook is coming out in the summer because I've had a lot of people say, like, I'm an audiobook person and I promise I'm working on it. But like if you read the book and you still don't get how the system is rigged against the have-nots, if you still can't see what's happening in the world, this massive wealth inequality gap that's only going to get bigger and bigger and bigger, and the world's only going to get worse thanks to climate change. And if you think you're a have and you're a have not, that's a really problematic situation because like right now, I think it's maybe 90, something like 95% of the world's money is in a tiny, tiny, tiny fraction of people. And that should terrify everyone everywhere. Um, but that's not a given. There's still enough democracies where people could actually make radical change. And I would love if it was peaceful and if people started getting educated and we could get good people to actually run for office instead of a lot of the self-interested garbage people who tend to run or stay in office. But if we don't do something peacefully, historically, wealth inequality gaps of this size have generally been resolved not peacefully. And I hope it doesn't come to that. I would love it if it was peaceful, but historically, it doesn't end well when countries let wealth inequality gaps grow this large.
There's a book, Corruptible, and they're on about the different countries. And say Denmark, it tends to have people that are really caring that go into government. and they're not corrupt and everything. And in other countries, when it is corrupt, it's the personality types that's attracted because sometimes people believe that they've been manipulated and they were good going in. A lot of the times, that's the character that they are, and they find a system that will work for them, and that's how they get in. Regarding the voting, I don't vote. I mean, I'm in Poland anyway, but I've seen it. I watch politics all over the world, and I say, I started studying sovereignty, common law, things like that. And it's like, you cannot push what you have your agenda because I didn't vote for you to push it on me. And it's very powerful because when they do come after you, they back off. So I have
Yeah. I
used
mean,
that myself.
it's an interesting thing because one of the things I talk about, I guess predictions, if you will, but like one of the things I talk about in the book is how democracy is really being overtaken by authoritarian capitalism. And a lot of people don't really understand what that means. But if you look at countries like China, who has a middle class, I believe over 700 million people, their middle class is larger than the entire population of the United States, right? I have friends who are Australian, who have lived in Singapore and UAE. These are, Singapore, I believe, is technically a democracy, but they've had like the same ruling power, ruling party for so many years that when I say it's a democracy, people are kind of like, oh, but the point is that, is that people in those countries, if they're happy, I mean, my friend who was Australian, I was talking with her, and she'd lived in Singapore for like a decade. She was moving to UAE, and I said to her, I was like, "Do you even miss voting? Do you even notice that you don't vote?" And she said, "No, to be honest, I've lived in countries that made my life easy and good enough that I didn't care. Like, as long as they were run well, as long as they didn't come after me, as long as they kind of left me alone to have a good life and made it easy for me to run my business and, do." And there is this, you know, there is this trend of authoritarian capitalism that's winning. And the good thing about that is when it's a benevolent dictatorship and it's heavy on the benevolence. The problem with that is, to your point, when those scales turn and all of a sudden it's really heavy on the dictatorship and not so heavy on the benevolence. And then you've lost your right to do anything about it peacefully from a voting perspective. And then you're just some person living in a country, probably without weapons and probably without any functional way to make change. And I think a lot of the world doesn't realize how much of the global population isn't living under democracies, isn't living under choice. And if we lose that, if authoritarian capitalism basically takes over, then it's a question of, well, where do you want to live that has the best authoritarian or that has the most favorable tax regime or stays out of your life or isn't, or you're not worried they're going to kick in the door every day. But all of these regimes that aren't democracies, they're really, really great until the day that they're not and you disagree with it and you have no mechanism for disagreement. And that's a scary thing for some of us who grew up in democracies, especially for those of us who grew up in the United States with the idea, granted, the idea, maybe not the reality, of what was supposed to be the city on the shining hill, what was supposed to be a place for liberty and freedom and equality and all of the things that the beautiful social experiment that America was and should have been are kind of eaten up by the realities of unfettered capitalism. And anything in extremes, butchering Marcus Aurelius, but anything in extremes is generally not sustainable and not good long term. So I worry about that, especially as an American.
And I mean, like I have a lot of kind of digital nomads and friends all over the world. Just the amount of people that are moving from one country to the other, thinking it'll be better, and then 3 years later going, this isn't great. They're just constantly moving. It's like people are moving from Canada to America, America to Mexico, and all over Europe as well, and just going to different countries. They're just moving, hoping for something better. And this, it's a sad state of affairs that we've got that. So just before your women in crypto, I'd like to just, you might just touch on that, please.
Yeah, so it actually goes back to when I left the government. When I was in the government, actually, a lot of us, the prosecutors, agents, analysts, a lot of us in the government in crypto were women. And so we would look around, we had this like whole group, and it just seemed like, oh, there's lots of women in crypto. And then I left and went to a tech company that happened to do blockchain analytics, but it was a tech company, a software as a service, a SaaS company. And if you looked around tech and financial services, the way they treated women, the way that the industry seemed to treat women, you would have thought there were no women. But I was seeing them every day working at companies, building things, running things. And so I said, we've got to do this better, where there's a lot of women who are working in this industry who need to be profiled, who need to be included. And it's not intentional. It's just the nature of, if you're not intentionally inclusive, you'll be unintentionally exclusive. And I always tell this joke or like make this example of like, if I was coming to Poland and I said to you, "Hey, Roy, I'm coming to Poland. Would you mind throwing a dinner party?" Would you invite a bunch of strangers, or would you invite people that you were comfortable with, who you knew wouldn't embarrass you, who wouldn't steal your silver, right? Like, you're going to invite your friends. And that's kind of how the world works. And it's how industries and markets work. And so if you don't purposely broaden your circle, if you don't intentionally think, who's not at the table? We don't have any women. We don't have any people of color. Like, it's just a bunch of white dudes. No offense. Like, statistically, it tends to be a bunch of white dudes, right? If you don't do that, or even like, frankly, if it's just a room full of Americans deciding everything for the world, you don't want a slightly different viewpoint. You don't want somebody from a different, you don't want any diversity. And I think that's the thing is, I started the association to say there are thousands of women in this industry. And if we aren't intentionally inclusive towards them, if we don't realize that we need to do a little bit of work to make sure that they're included, you're going to build the same crappy system that traditional finance did, which was built by a bunch of men, largely white men, largely British men, right? Or like wherever they were from, largely men, largely white men. And fine, but every single study, all data points to things being built better with diversity of thought and experience. So we just wanted to make crypto, blockchain, and Web3 better by being more inclusive to women as an industry. And so we do all kinds of networking events, we do educational events, we do an advocacy program where we have an Unmantle Your Panel initiative where we get male allies to pledge not to speak on all male panels. We have conferences that pledge to have at least 30% women or no mantles. We have a global speaker directory of women to make it easier to find the women. And it's just all driving towards, we could just do a little bit better at including women, because you just don't want everything run by the same person, right? And we just happen to focus on women, but there's a lot of incredible organizations that we partner with that do LGBTQ and people of color and, Black women in blockchain, and lots of really good organizations. But the idea is just like, look, if you're sitting around the table, some people just don't notice when it's a bunch of white men making decisions for everybody else. And those of us that are having our decisions made for us tend to notice. But if you want to build something better, if you want global adoption, you want more people in the room, you want diversity. So, I am horrified and saddened by what's happening in America right now, where DEI, or diversity, equity, and inclusion, has become this boogeyman, when in reality, anyone who knows anything about the story of America knows that we were built on diversity, equity, and inclusion. We were built on all of the different people who came over from all kinds of different countries, whether they were treated well initially, or whether we got there, or whether we're still struggling. The melting pot that was America's diversity is what made us great. And I think a lot of us are really saddened and horrified and terrified of what happens when when a country that needs competitiveness at a time in a multipolar world, meaning like right now, so many countries have rising GDP, rising populations. Like, America is not the strongest on some measurements, on many measurements outside of defense spending. But one of the things that made us strong was our diversity, right? And if you lose that, it's a real problem. Now, to your point earlier, some countries, if you let a lot of people in and you don't have a plan for it, you don't have integration, you don't have sufficient policing, like, it can be a problem, right? And it goes back to nuance and temperance and balance and acknowledging the good and the bad at the same time. But I just don't think anything in extremes is good, and eradicating diversity, equity, and inclusion is not the way to remain globally competitive. So we'll see what happens. But if you're a woman, man, We take pets, non-binary. We're inclusive to anyone who just thinks that the future of digital finance should be more inclusive to women. Our website's womenincrypto.org. And if you're somebody in the industry, interested in the industry, crypto curious about the industry, definitely check us out. We do events all around the world. I just was in Poland and I met some phenomenal women, and we might have a chapter growing there soon. And if we don't have a chapter where you're at and you'd be interested in starting one, reach out to me on LinkedIn because we have, I think, over 60 regional ambassadors now who grow chapters everywhere. So if you're passionate about that, just reach out.
Fair enough. No, perfect. So thoroughly enjoyed it. Amanda, you might let people know where they can find you.
Yeah, so the book, if you're in the United States, the book's available for pre-order at amandawick.com. Starting May 1st, it'll be available on all the major Amazon, Barnes and Noble, etc. But if you go to amandawick.com and you sign up for the updates, I'll send you everything you need to know about where you can get the book, when the audiobook's coming out, well, the websites it'll be available on. And there's like a special offer for pre-orders if you're in the United States. But please go to amandawick.com and just sign up, send me your email, and I'll send you everything that you need to know.
Perfect. And make sure I put the links both on the audio and the video, as well as the crypto for women one as well that you mentioned earlier. Thank you very much, Amanda.
Roy, thanks so much for having me.
No problem. So that's all for the Crypto Podcast. You'll find all our episodes on thecryptopodcast.org. Be sure to give us a thumbs up, 5-star rating, share with your friends. And you'll find my other 6 podcasts. You scan the QR code, find all of them there. Go to roycon.com. If you're looking for a virtual assistant, go to va.org. Until next week, take care.